Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about the 4F stress response type. Now, I just need you to know that this comes from the work of a therapist called Pete Walker. And Pete Walker has written an amazing book called Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. I would highly recommend this book if you are struggling with complex trauma, if you feel that you may have complex trauma. And let's face it, most of us alive on the planet today have had some version of trauma, complex trauma. Unless you've been living under a rock for your entire life, you probably have a degree of complex trauma. So if you want to understand yourself a little bit better, if you want to understand how your brain works, how you are wired and how you work and how you respond to certain situations and why you respond the way you do, then I would highly recommend his book. It will help to create a lot of self-awareness, and it'll help you in your daily life in terms of showing up in your relationships and your job or your business or your career as well. So all around really, really useful. So Pete Walker talks about the trauma types. There's a chapter in the book titled, "What is your trauma type?" And this is when he goes into the 4F, what I call your stress response types. So this essentially is how you respond to stress or pressure or trauma. And the idea behind this theory is that most of us will have a particular default that we will resort to. Often people think that this is their personality. But if we go back to childhood, and it's always important to reflect on your childhood because that helps you to understand why potentially you behave the way you do. And Pete's theory is that when we have trauma in childhood, or depending on how we are conditioned in childhood, because let's face it, we are all conditioned. Childhood is a time when our brains are the most plastic, and that's when we are conditioned. And what we see when we grow up as children, how we are treated, what we receive, what we don't receive, whatever is modeled to us from our parents is then what becomes hardwired in our neural pathways. We become conditioned that way, and that's what we take into adulthood. Okay. So I'm going to break down each stress response type, and I would like you to tell me in the comments what you think you are, and if you found this helpful. As far as I'm concerned, it's a hugely helpful tool in terms of creating huge levels of self-awareness and helping you to change your behavior if you need to change your behavior. Okay, so the first response type, most of us have heard about fight, flight, or freeze. From a neurobiological perspective, our brain's primary function is to keep us safe. So therefore, if my brain perceives something to be dangerous, then I have three choices. And as I say, this is from a neurobiological perspective. I can either fight back, I can either flight, run away, or I can freeze and just shut down, not do anything. These are all stress responses. These all come from the autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that is designed to keep us alive. We cannot control that with our conscious, rational brain. So our stress responses happen automatically. So when I'm threatened, or when my brain thinks I'm being threatened, sometimes it's just your perception, I can either fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. Pete Walker has a fourth option. And as I say, this is all his work, so I'm crediting him with that. And he talks about the fawn stress response. So fawning is about compromising, listening, being of service, being really helpful, servitude, groveling, okay? And I'm going to be breaking down each of those response types in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the fight types. Now, again, according to Pete Walker, when we are healthy, when we have a healthy sense of self, it's normal to flex between those 4 stress response styles, depending on the situation. Like sometimes I need to fight back. Sometimes I need, the best thing for me is just going to be to leave, to flight. Sometimes that's going to be the best thing to keep me safe. Sometimes I need to freeze. Sometimes I need to fawn. It's normal. Our nervous system will naturally fluctuate between those stress response styles depending on the situation and the appropriateness. But what often happens is, because of childhood trauma, because of our conditioning, because of the circumstances we are forced to live with sometimes, because of the needs that we sometimes need that we don't get, we will develop a default stress response type or trauma type. And this happens because we adapt in our childhood in order to keep us safe. It all comes down to feeling safe, to knowing that we are safe at the level of our nervous system. So let's have a look at the fight type. So then what happens is we develop this default type, and we carry that into adulthood, and that almost becomes hardwired. People would say, oh, that's just my personality. I'm just a very controlling, bossy person. But actually, when we understand it from Pete Walker's perspective, we can see that potentially this is a survival response that you go into, and that sometimes becomes heightened when you are threatened, when you're under stress. So often what we think is our personality is actually just our adaptive behavior. Again, it's all about survival and keeping ourselves safe. So when we look at the flight types, number 1, the flight type's motto is, I need to control to connect. When I talk about connection, I mean connecting to other people and to myself. So I need to control to connect, and I need to rage to feel safe. Okay. Now, the flight types are generally very assertive people, very courageous people. These types make good leaders. These types will probably have very, very good boundaries. But when the fight types are stressed, when they're triggered, they may become over-controlling. They may become over-assertive. They may become really autocratic. They may become explosive, super angry, needing to control situations and people even more. If we look at the far end of the spectrum for the fight type, these types can even become quite narcissistic in their behavior, demanding perfection from others, okay? I used to work in the corporate space. I can think of, off the top of my head, many fight types that I worked with. And I see this pattern. Perhaps you're thinking in your mind as you're listening to this video that, yeah, actually I know fight types in my life and I can see that pattern. As soon as they feel unsafe, as soon as they feel triggered, they go into this explosive, over-controlling behavior, okay? And understanding this in others and yourself is so important and so helpful in all of this, okay? So that is your fight type. The flight type then tends to be very busy, always hurrying and rushing, very industrious. Flight types tend to be overachievers, workaholics, perfectionists. The flight type's motto is, I need to be perfect to connect to myself and others. I need to be perfect to feel safe. If the flight type isn't in that zone where they are showing up as perfect, and often these are the real adrenaline junkies, right? That's what the flight type needs to feel safe, is that there's that striving, that doing, that working, that hurrying, that rushing, that need to be perfect to feel safe, okay? We then have the freeze types, and the freeze types motto is, there's no way I'll connect. And the freeze types need to hide away to feel safe. So I know myself personally, one of my default response types was that I would freeze. I would freeze when I feel, and I'm still very aware when I'm going into that freeze response, when I feel overwhelmed or I feel pressurized or I feel stressed. So the freezers, if you are a freezer, you may be a very peaceful person. You may have be very good at be very mindful. You have acute awareness, but there may be tendencies to dissociating, contracting, going inwards, feeling immobilized, feeling shut down, hiding, camouflaging yourself, just not being able to really do anything, just literally freezing metaphorically in terms of how you show up. This may be where procrastination comes in, okay? So that is your classic freeze responder. If you think of a child that's being traumatized, that's got a lot of stress going on in their environment, needing to hide away, you know, running and hiding in the cupboard, that would be kind of a great example to describe what happens in your nervous system when you go into that freeze, where it's literally as if everything stops and shuts down. And there's that stagnant kind of state, okay? The fourth type is the fawn response type. And as I say, this comes from the work of Pete Walker. So fawning behavior is all about love and service and compromise and over listening. These are the people that are just so nice and so kind. And you may think, well, you know, what's wrong with that? It's good to be kind, it's good to be nice. A fawn responder's motto is, I need to merge with others to connect. I need to grovel to feel safe. Often when children grow up in environments where one of the parents is quite narcissistic and quite controlling and quite angry, they may adopt a fawn response, okay? And essentially fawners will with fawning, there may be a loss of self, because what you're doing if you are a fawner is you will be pleasing the other, you will be groveling, over-serving, over-giving. doing whatever they want. Why? Because it's a way that you can keep yourself safe in all of that. So you see this in abusive relationships where you have a narcissist and then you have the codependent person on the other side who may resort to fawning behavior because it keeps them feeling safe in their nervous system, right? So this is where codependency comes in. And actually, this is a loss of self. A lot of therapists will talk about codependency as being a loss of self or a false self, because what you're doing is you are adapting to keep yourself safe from the threats around you or from the really controlling, angry person that you're having to interact with and having to deal with. And so you adapt your personality, you minimize your needs, you minimize your wants, you minimize your desires, you're afraid to speak up, you're afraid to express your opinions, you're afraid to express your views, you're afraid to be yourself, essentially. So you adopt this false self, which is this fawning personality style, or as people says, your stress response type. So I really, really hope that this helped you to create more self-awareness about what your default personality stress response type is, or trauma type as people calls it. A lot of people will have a combination of two. You could be a freeze fawn. You could be a flight fawn or a freeze flight, whatever it is. You could be a combination of two. Remember, this is about your default. Like, what is your default? Okay. So this is really useful because when you understand how you work, then you can begin to change your behavior. You can begin to become more mindful about how you respond or how you react to others, how you show up, why you show up. You can begin, for me, it's about putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, right? Understanding how your childhood shaped you and molded that brain that is so plastic in childhood, and understanding how you can begin to change your conditioning and rewire those pathways. I do a lot of work with EMDR, and this is part of the EMDR process, is about looking at those beliefs about yourself that influence how you behave and how you show up, and challenging those beliefs, as well as helping you to process those difficult memories associated with all of that. So I hope this really helped you. Let me know in the comments what type you think you are, and I will see you again soon. Take care.